Okay, Evan had a good question. He wanted to know how you know tensile strength and stuff like that of bolts. You know that chart you guys worked with in Phil's class out of 4313 that told you how many rivets per inch that you're supposed to use?
Yeah.
Where did that chart come from?
4313.
It says right in there where it came from. Mill Handbook 5, MIL HDBK 5.
Is that like dictionary that he said he has over there, like everything that we need to know about?
No, it's
Machinist handbook.
No, MIL HDBK 5, which is now something other. They changed it, but 4313 still references it as Mill Handbook 5. And it's an engineering data. It's where it all came from, and it expands upon that and has all the data in there where that came from. It's way beyond my understanding. But it's things like that that tells you exactly what holes to drill in certain size aluminum. So like for a 3/32 rivet, what size drill bit to use?
Number 40.
A what?
Number 40.
Number 40.
According to who?
According to
Mill
Mill
Handbook 5.
Yeah, Mill Book 5.
Mill Handbook 5 says 41.
Oh, I should probably check the
They're
book
just being cautious.
What does your textbook say? You don't know, you didn't read it. It says 40.
Yeah, textbook, approved data.
Yeah. So,
Is
you know,
Mill
if you actually
Handbook-
read 4313 and it actually says to fit the holes per Mill Handbook 5, and you go to Mill Handbook 5 and you see what size holes they are, and it tells you it's supposed to be a 41, and you used a 40, did you do it for 4313? No, you did not. What prevails? The textbook that was written by the FAA or Mill Handbook 5?
Mill Handbook 5.
And you better believe it, because 4313 is considered acceptable data. Your textbook is not. So that's where that data comes from. Just like how many rivets per inch to use for countersunk rivets. I don't know, the chart clearly says protruding head rivets. It doesn't say countersunk rivets.
We add half a
Yeah,
diameter.
per fill. Add
Half diameter.
half
Add a half a D.
All right, so moving on from that. But anyway, that's it's engineering data. It's like here. It's hard to understand. And what are you getting at? And,
God damn it.
all right.
Get into this.
So let me see. Okay, so we left off with talking about. We were talking about adding the right kind of torque here. Torque. Going back to my chart. All right. Okay, so the torque here is what kind of threads? Nope. It's fine up here, coarse down here. What is the condition of the thread?
Clean.
Clean and dry.
From oil-free cadmium plated threads. So what kind of oil did you use on there? NO oil. Are you familiar with that, Joe? Oxygen tanks. You were a welder.
Mm-hmm.
What kind? All the oxygen tanks, all the gauges say use.
Use no oil, yeah.
It says use no oil on all oxygen tanks. Use no oil. So I was going to my oxygen shops looking for NO oil. What? Yeah, NO oil. It says right here. Use NO oil.
I think that joke was too dorky for me.
Huh?
I think that joke was too dorky for me.
It's a great joke when they go looking for it. All right. For some applications, you will use oil. Like, for example, for engines, you do use a wet torque on everything. And if you fail to use a wet torque and you do it to a dry torque, you're going to lose somewhere around 40% of the torque that you're supposed to put on it. And that is going to create a problem. Let's see. So wet torque increases torque by about 40%. Some ask for dry torque, some ask for wet. Make sure you know what you're doing. So could I ever use this chart for an engine?
Nope. No. If it calls for a dry torque and it's not in the manufacturer's.
So I'm working on my Continental engine, and I find something, and I'm like, well, let's just make it something simple. It's really not that important, like the rocker box screws, the covers that go over the rockers.
Not important, man.
Yeah, they're non-structural. You know, they leak oil if it's not right. It's about the end of it. So, where am I gonna look for the torque for those screws? for the rocker box covers on my Cessna aircraft.
In the rocker box portion of your manual.
What manual?
The
The
manufacturer.
manufacturer manual.
What manufacturer?
Says Continental Engine Manufacturer.
Well, it's a Cessna aircraft, isn't it?
So Cessna first, and maybe.
No, you start with the engine.
Gonna start with the engine. So
Start
look at
small.
the engine. Now where I go, the engine manual, where am I gonna look first? What am I gonna look for?
Rocker box.
Overhead
I'm gonna
mount.
look for rocker box screws. Right? Then after that, I think they're quarter 20s on my airplane. So if it doesn't specifically say rocker box screws, then what's the next thing I'm gonna look for?
Engine manual general torque.
Engine manual general torque. And what if I don't find it after that?
The aircraft
again.
general torque.
What's the other answer you threw out?
Keep looking.
Keep looking. It's there. You're not gonna just jump to an airframe. That would be very similar to saying, well, I couldn't find it in the Continental manual. I'll try the Lycoming manual. Maybe it'll tell me what to do for the. No, it's there. You just gotta keep looking, right? This right here, is this an airframe, an engine, or a prop, or all of the above?
All of the above. None of the above.
I'd say this is airframe only. This is not an engine thing. Yeah.
Are you able to get all these manuals on demand online? Is it you have to pay for them, buy them, or can they, if you're doing something like this, can you just go to Continental's website and get their?
Our subscription here is $5,000 a year.
Oh wow! So you have to get it from some type of subscription.
Right. However, and I mentioned this before, you are required to use the correct and current manual. I think those are the words. What is correct and current?
One that came up with manufacturing line with.
The one it came out of the factory with. What about all revisions and updates?
Doesn't necessarily.
Nope. I have a letter from the FAA saying it does not have to. If you ever want to see it, I'll show it to you. It wasn't addressed to me. I just found it on the internet. I'm not that cool. But if you're working on other people's airplane and you're doing it for a living and the airplane goes down, and I think any decent aviation attorney is going to eat your lunch with that one. So you had access to the current manual and you chose not to use it. Is this what I understand you saying? And you can't come back with, yeah, but it was $5,000. It's not going to be the answer that the jury's going to love. So, but yes, the current and correct. What was the point behind that? Who knows?
Don't use the old one?
What?
You said don't use the old one, use the.
If you're working on other people's plane, if you're not, you're just doing it for yourself and you can't afford the $5,000, well, get a job working for a school, convince them to buy the manuals that work for your airplane, and then you have access to it.
Dean's gonna love that one on YouTube.
Trust me, my dean is at home watching this on his, he needs to, he's got children.
He's got too much free time.
He's got a problem.
Oh, I really can't hope he watches this.
He's got.
Nobody watches
I'm just
it.
gonna send him it.
What's
I'm just
the
gonna send him the video.
He just got elected, man.
No, so it's not difficult. Like I found the manuals for my plane out there, and I found stuff, and you can buy the manual. They're making it more and more difficult, but before the school had access to the new manuals, I had a manual with the revisions. It wasn't difficult. You know what they will usually give you for free is the parts manual. They always want to give you the parts manual for free. They want to help you buy parts. So that's out there. There's a lot of PDF files out there. There's stuff you can do, so it's not terribly difficult. Yeah, I have all new manuals for my engine. Somebody else had just bought them, send me, hey, you can borrow them and make copies, whatever. Copyright infringement, now I'm busted there. So
So for those like PDFs, how do you determine the?
validity and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, determining validity of manuals can be a little difficult. All right, so working in a repair facility, we subscribed to service bulletins. It was a paid subscription. It was reasonably priced, and in the service bulletin subscription service, one of the service bulletin's letters or instructions would include the latest revisions of all publications. And you could cross-reference it to that. So we knew we had the most current service bulletins because we subscribed to it, so you could read them and look at the manual and make sure it was the right manual. You can also call tech support. Tech support is not somebody who you should call in this classroom to ask some stupid
For battery.
for battery crap. Don't do that. Because then when you actually need them, they're not there. But you're working on something, you can call tech support. They're actually pretty good. You just have to talk intelligently. If you talk, which means when you call them up, you say, I'm working on this aircraft, this model number, this serial number, this production year model, with this much tack time, this much total time, even if it's not relevant. And this is the question I have. I'm using this manual dated such and such with the following revisions. Is this the most current manual? And they'll probably say something like, well, how come you don't just subscribe to it through the very on? I'm like, oh, I don't know. But they'll talk you through it.
I like the sound of a real person's voice.
Yes. Yes, and they are real people based in the U.S. and they're pretty bright. I told you I called tech support on my airplane.
Yeah, and they went to the factory floor.
Because, dude, that's an excellent question. Nobody's ever called me that. I got to go down the factory floor and look at an engine that's being built. Call you back in an hour. 30 minutes later. Oh yeah, no, it's that's the way it's supposed to be. Okay. Okay, so dry torque. Okay, it calls for wet torque. We're going to use exactly what is called for in the manual, like Lycoming. Continental 100 weight is what they want for wet torque. Lycoming gets really weird. They're like, we want a mixture of 100 weight oil with 15% STP oil additive in it. I've heard some podcasts where somebody's like, yeah, I prefer this other stuff. Okay, you can't prefer some other stuff if it's not listed in the manual. Just like one day our engine builder guy got a bug up his butt that he was going to no longer follow the manual and use what exactly lubricants they wanted on the bearings. He was going to use white lithium grease because that's what they use in cars. And I'm like, well, you can't just do that, you know. So, all right, we know how to use the torque adapter. We covered that. Let's see. Bolting practices. Torque wrenches, bolting practices. They say bolts are installed with the head facing up, so that if the nut fell off, because you guys safetied the head and didn't put anything on the nut, that nut falls off, at least the bolt stays put. Or forward, so you can think air pressure holds it, and then it goes in from the outside. I don't know why. Do not use self-locking nuts in areas where the loss of a nut can result in engine failure, especially turbine engine, which would be a turbine engine inlet. Where else can you not use a self-locking nut?
Where it can be ingested.
Yeah, I kind of tend to use that rule also with nuts and lock washers. Unless the factory did it that way, I wouldn't use a nut lock washer combination like a self-locking nut.
You think they would put it from the inside out? That's what the plate rolls. Throw the nuts out.
It would, but the center of gravity always goes towards the center. And so if you're slipping, I don't know. I've thought about it over and over again. Let's see.
Probably.
Bolt head self. Okay, we got that. The greatest point of failure on a bolt is which thread?
The
First
point where
one
it gets to the grip.
after the grip.
Yes.
First one after the grip.
So
Yeah.
the greatest
Or it turns
point
into
of
the
failure on a bolt is the last thread. Is the easier way to say it.
And that is.
The last thread. So do not line up. Do not line up parting surface. At this point. Which is to say the joint. Don't line up the joint or the edge of the joint with that surface. Go before it, go after it. All right, so torquing. Torquing is a measurement of twist, correct? And we talked about in 309, but I will remind you that applied torque the twist is an estimate. Estimate of how much tension the bolt has. The ultimate goal It's tension, not torque. So what am I saying? We're given a torque chart that tells us to twist a bolt to a certain amount of foot-pounds or inch-pounds, which is literally a foot-pound is 1 pound at an arm that is 1 foot. 1 inch-pound is really 1 pound at an arm that's 1 inch, right? So they're telling us how much twist to put on it, but we don't care about twist. Twist is not important at all. What is important? How much pull is on it. So, right. Think of a bolt as a spring that is clamping the part. As long as the load on the spring does not exceed the spring tension, the spring does not move. If the spring moves, it's subjected to work hardening and failure. So we've got a part, we'll put a spring, it's kind of holding it together. And if the part does this, the two want to go this way, then the spring gets stretched, right? Pulls it back together. And that's fine because it's a spring, but every time it does it, the spring gets, we'll say the spring can only stretch 100 times. At the 100th time, it's going to break. So if we bolt something together and it goes apart, the spring stretched once. Do it again, the spring stretched twice. It can do it 100 times, right? 99, 100, it flies apart. So what is the goal? You want a spring that's tight enough that the two parts never ever leave each other. And that's what we're doing with this bolt. It's a spring. We're going to tighten it. We're going to tighten it under so much tension that the two parts never stretch the bolt, because it can only stretch a couple of times before it pops. And that's what's important, is we get that tension. So if we're torquing cylinders onto an airplane and we mistakenly dry torque it, which a lot of people do, don't know any better, then the spring is under 60% of the proper tension. So what's the spring going to do? Every single time it fires, it stretches a little bit. Well, thankfully you're going to get more than 100 times out of it, and maybe you get quite a few considering that. But eventually, the spring's going to snap and the stud's going to fall out. Then another one, and then eventually what happens, when a couple of them go, then it happens really fast, and then what happens to the cylinder?
Bye-bye.
Well, you get a cylinder depart light comes on in your... What's it called, say?
What? Master warning light comes on.
Yeah. Yeah, most airplanes have a really convenient feature. Instead of a little red light bulb that blinks, it's just oil splashes across your windscreen and a hole comes out of the side of the counter.
So the explosion in front of you is a good indicator you fucked up.
What's the movie that I like, Madagascar? He's like, what is it, sir? It seems to be some sort of blinking thing that catches your attention.
Or good news, passengers, we're landing immediately.
Yeah.
Crash landing.
What was that? Yeah, nothing's okay. Yes.
Is there any application or use of torque to yield bolts or studs?
Torque to yield. That is yeah, I think you're still doing that.
The motors that do it in the automotive industry don't seem to really be happy with it.
Explain it.
Well, they just seem to go
No,
back.
what is torque to yield?
Oh, I know what torque to yield is, but sorry.
Explain it.
So,
I know.
torquing it to the point at which the stud starts to actually pull a little bit, where it starts
Or
to
like
yield.
torque angle.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what everything is to a point. You're actually, it's yielding a little tiny bit,
Yeah,
and
but
so
I
you
think
can't stretch any
so.
more
Like
under the
some of
load.
them are meant a little bit more specifically, I guess.
They yield a little bit more than others.
I guess pretty
Yes.
much.
So for example, the bolts on a lot of the high horsepower light combing engines, the bigger, more expensive one, the turbocharged, you actually stretch them, you torque them with a micrometer.
I always wondered about that. It's like, do you bring it past yield point or before yield point? Because if you go, what's yield point is when it doesn't return back to its original shape, right?
I think so, yeah.
So why would you want to go past yield point?
This I don't know. This is just it kind of went over my head.
Yeah, we need an engineer for that.
Yeah. What the hell does a guy driving a train have to do with this? Why don't you
Blowing out a
let the
whistle.
grown-ups talk, right?
At the event, at the aerospace system, I met a
We've been
guy.
waiting all day to use that one.
He was one of the students, the engineers in the program, and he was the guy who was like, when you were teaching electricity, he's like, that's not right. And like the aerodynamics, he's like, yeah, no, they don't really teach it to you right. And I was like, okay, cool.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
All right, so I just really want to drive home this point how incredibly important torquing is. We take it for granted, or we take it to mean that it's actually the twist. We're so concentrated on this twist that we forget that it's about the pull, and that's where having oil-free CAD-plated threads, having the right lubricant, either being lubricant or not lubricant, is so critically important. It's going to be very important as we get into the engines in the next class. So let's see. Use of lubricants. So adding a lubricant can add torque up to about 50%. So adding lubricant where it shouldn't be increases torque by 50%. So if you're only supposed to go to 100 inch-pounds, you just went to 150. And then what happens? Usually, sometimes.
Righty-loosey.
Yeah, it just starts to get loose all of a sudden. So you're tightening, you're waiting for the thing to click, but it doesn't. It just keeps going around. So what do?
Keep tightening it.
Back it off, quarter turn, take your wrench off. Hope nobody saw you, right? Well, gum on it, hold it. That's what the torque stripe is for. It dries on and holds the bolt in place.
5-minute kit.
Yeah.
JB Weld.
JB
Yeah.
Weld,
Or
exactly.
epoxy.
Okay, these are all things we don't do. So using lubricant where it's not allowed, as is too much tension, which, yeah.
Can you use lubricant and like anti-seize, or it would always be like one of the
Use exactly what they say. We are not allowed to make up our own thing. That is bad, bad, bad. So if it said something about, use anti-seize, C5A, which is a very specific anti-seize, you're like, well, I don't really have C5A, but I have this other stuff which says anti-seize, so it's the same thing, so I'm going to use that. Well, once you've done that, I say, don't even waste your time with the torque chart anymore, because you're just making up your own stuff, so why bother, it's like half, because the two don't match. So don't bother. So use exactly what they say, or
Don't do it at all.
don't do, yeah. Let's see, if lubricant is, when we get into this, I'll be, so the told guy, we don't even do it. And these little cans, and people lubricate the threads, have a little thing of one little drop on the thread and put it on. No. When I lubricate threads, I take a paintbrush and I slop it out and paint it on there. I want the threads lubricated. I want the nut dripping oil off of it so every surface is covered, every thread is covered, and the part that it goes on is also sloppy wet with oil. It means the threads and the bearing surface. That's how the engineer figured it out. They didn't figure out one drop inside thread number 3. It is well lubricated. Lubricated on the threads, lubricated on the face, because that's what the torque is computed to get the stretch.
Thought you weren't supposed to get lubricant on the washers and whatnot.
Oh yeah, if it's a wet torque, yes. If it calls for torque,
Yeah,
I do.
Okay.
Did you read that somewhere?
I believe so.
Where?
It might have been part of my Porsche manual for rebuilding the motor.
Oh.
It could have been. I think
Porsche made an aircraft engine.
Yeah.
He said don't.
So I just didn't know if that was okay.
I do, unless otherwise I'm
Okay.
going to do that.
Pressure wash with oil.
Well, you also have to think about what kind of material might be under what you're bolting. If there's paint, that was another problem we had for many years. People, want to paint these beautiful engines. They paint the cylinder bases and get a nice thick coat of paint down there, and then put a nut against that, and then the paint would wear out, and then the cylinder was loose. So manuals will often call for how many mils you can have of paint. Okay, what else we got here? All right, we got that. We talked about this the other day, right?
Yes.
V-nuts. Our king for a day. Tighten them up. Never walk away from a loose hose. All right. I guess that's all I have.